I would like to extend my humble appreciation and thanks to His Holiness Karakin II, Catholicos of all Armenians, Archbishop Viken, President of the Mother See Committee of the Preservation of Artsakh Cultural Spiritual Heritage, who contacted me initially and invited me, Father Garagan of the Secretariat of the Mission Office for the numerous emails and all the bothering that we've been bothering you, and of course all of those who were involved in inviting us and organizing this conference, and most importantly all those in the kitchen for all the magnificent food. My aim today is to advocate for the preservation of intangible heritage. We have already heard during this conference about the destruction of tangible things. For example, the churches and monasteries of the Middle East that were destroyed recently by the Islamic State. The Armenian khashkars that were ruined by Azerbaijan in recent years, and most notably in the recent war. The hundreds of Armenian and Syriac manuscripts and documents that were lost during the genocide, which was orchestrated by the Ottoman state more than 100 years ago. And the art that gets lost in wars, we heard about that yesterday. But sometimes we lose sight of the intangible heritage that also gets lost through wars and displacement. Language is intangible. Literature is intangible. Tradition is intangible. And the way of life, cooking, all of that is part of the tradition that adorns our lands. They are all intangible. If all of the Armenian and Syriac literature that was ever written throughout history is preserved today, we would need massive buildings to host the manuscripts that contained them. But as we live in a volatile land that witnessed the loss of literature, not only because of the recent wars of the last 100 years or so, but rather of centuries of persecutions, almost 2,000 years of sporadic persecutions, today we only have a small amount of the original literature left. But what is left needs to be preserved, and very importantly, needs to be disseminated. How are we to preserve this literary heritage? How are we to disseminate it and make it available? And how can we link this activity of preservation with the current issues of war and displacement? To illustrate the importance of the literary heritage that survives, let's take a look at the case of the Syriac-Armenian cultural exchange. A few years ago, I was writing a book about the Syriac dot. Yes, you heard it right, the dot. This may seem crazy, writing a book about the dot, but unlike the English dot on the letters I and J, for example, the Syriac dot is an essential tool for reading. Without the dot, you will not be able to read any Syriac text. I was looking into the history of this Syriac dot. When does it first appear? Lo and behold, the answer came from Armenia. Aramaic inscriptions made their way to Armenia well before the Christian era. As it happened, there is a 2nd century AD inscription from Garni, about 1 hour east of here, that had the dot that I was looking for. The dot itself may not be of significance, but it demonstrates that Aramaic-Armenian contact started early on, even before the expansion of Christianity into both Mesopotamia and Armenia. The coexistence of the Aramaic and Armenian languages gave rise to borrowings in both directions. There are a few dozen Aramaic and Syriac words that made it into the Armenian language, and there are over 20 Armenian words that made it into the Syriac language. One of our projects at the Beth Mardutha Institute, where I am based, is to develop a historical dictionary of the Syriac language. We plan to mark in this dictionary borrowings from and to Syriac. As such, we intend to have a linguistic analysis of the Syriac words that made it into Armenian and the Armenian words that made it into Syriac. This in itself is an act of cultural preservation. Let's move to the literary heritage and give some more examples. Writing about their own conversion to Christianity, the Armenians and Syriacs happen to share a story, the Syriac Acts of Adai, a story of the apostle who was sent by Jesus to King Abgar of Edessa to heal the king. It tells the story of the Christianization of the Syriac-speaking Edessa. The story made it into the Armenian tradition, where Adai is known as Tadeos. And the reception history of the Armenian version is very interesting. The historian Moses makes King Abgar Armenian, and as such, the Syriacs and Armenians now share, I emphasize, share a common story that provides for each community a sense of pride. And this common heritage survived 2,000 years, despite wars and genocides committed against our two peoples. Just this morning, we heard Ms. Lucine, Minister of Education, Science and Culture and Sports of the Republic of Artsakh, concluding her message with reference to the Abgar story, the same story I am talking about. Indeed, this shared heritage is very much alive. In 2015, my wife and I were invited by the Armenian Church in America to attend the Armenian Genocide Commemoration at the Washington National Cathedral, led by His Holiness Karakin II, His Holiness Aram I, and His Holiness Ephraim II. Ephraim is the Syriac Patriarch. The concluding prayers sought the intercessions of Jacob of Nisibis, Barsom, Ephraim. My wife and I looked at each other. It was as if we were in a Syriac service. Indeed, the Syriac-Armenian contact may have started with the dot in the inscription of Garni, just 1 hour from here, but the contact is a continuum that goes on until today. This continuum includes many literary works that are shared by the two communities. The 4th century demonstration of Afrahat, these are 23 spiritual topics, were written in Syriac and made their way into Armenian. The Armenian version attributes them to Jacob of Nisibis, the very saint whose intercessions was sought by His Holiness Karakin II in the Genocide Commemoration Service that I just mentioned. Our publishing house, Gorgias Press, published a few years ago Armenian poems by Ephraim. And here's a copy if somebody would like to take a look at it later. And we know that Ephraim is a Syriac writer, but his works made it into Armenian. In some cases, the Armenian translations of Syriac texts acted as preservers of cultural heritage. St. Ephraim wrote also a commentary on the Gospels, but this commentary was long lost in the original Syriac. It only survives in an Armenian translation. If we wanted to get close to the Syriac Gospel version of St. Ephraim, we had to peek through the Armenian version of St. Ephraim's commentary. It was not until the middle of the 20th century when fragments of the original Syriac appeared in the French market, black market of antiquity. This is an example of how Armenian acted as a preserver of cultural heritage. I am not going to list all the other texts that are shared by the Armenian and the Syriac communities. The Oxford scholar Robert Thompson, in his paper, Literary Interactions Between Syriac and Armenian, gives an exhaustive account. We just wanted to see some examples. In addition to the shared texts, there are also texts that survive only in Syriac and only in Armenian. I am not a scholar of Armenian, so I will be now talking about the Syriac corpus. The Syriac corpus is hard to estimate, as it is not transcribed into computer files. Some estimate it at about 50 million words. Our institute began in the past few years to encode these texts, to preserve them digitally, and also not only to preserve them, but also to disseminate them online, freely online. Our online tools are free and are extensively used by both the Syriac community and also by the scholarly community. This is something that can be duplicated for Armenian. We thus far encoded 13 million words in the Syriac corpus. And with these 13 million words came an idea. The idea to engage young men and women in the Middle East who are displaced by war or who are in need of much financial assistance in order to go on with their lives. We looked at our workflow to find ways to engage these young men and women in war-torn countries, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. Can we find ways to provide them with employment? And at the same time, they will be working on the preservation of their own heritage. Earlier this year, I went through my contact list on my email and selected 100 friends. Will they be interested in contributing just $100 a month to support our youth in the Middle East? We would run a pilot project by hiring youth to work on projects for the preservation of their own literary heritage. They need not be scholars, these young men and women. They can type texts on the computer. They can proofread texts that were typed by others. They can transcribe manuscripts digitally. They can tag text. There's so many things that they can do, and we can leave the analysis to the university scholars. These are laborious tasks, but they definitely can do them. About 10 of my friends responded, and we began a pilot project last spring. We hired a local manager. Through our contacts, we found young men and women in need of jobs. They knew Syriac enough to do the necessary tasks. We hired them. We now meet with them, with these members monthly over Zoom. And it is lovely to see these young men and women involved. And they are excited. And they don't feel that just somebody just gave me money to help me. No, they are producing. They are working. And they are very proud that they are working on things from their own language and their own heritage. Also, Western scholars from major universities are very much appreciative of what our young men and women are producing. Now they have literary resources that aid them in their research and analysis. A few months ago, we launched, in cooperation with the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, the texts that were produced by these young men and women, 13 million words. Scholars were amazed at what was produced. And scholars have been waiting for such tools since the beginning of the digital age. Greek has it, Latin has it, Hebrew has it, but Syriac doesn't have it. And Syriac scholars were waiting for that. So these young men and women did it for them. Now that the pilot project is working, we are hoping to reach out to foundations in order to make this operation sustainable. So to summarize, language and literature are part of cultural heritage, and they too get victimized with war and genocide. The preservation of the literary heritage is as important as the preservations of buildings and other structures. Part of the scholarly work is the preservation of the cultural heritage can be carved out, some of this work, and directed at the heirs of the heritage, the community, the young men and women that we're talking about, who are in much need of employment and help. Young people, when they're doing this, because we're training them with digital humanities techniques, they can be trained in these technologies, and that can open avenues for them for future employment with other people. In other words, we kill, I know we're not supposed to be killing in this kind of conference, but we kill two birds in one stone. We preserve the intangible literary heritage and disseminate it online, and at the same time, help young men and women in war-torn countries to pick up their lives. If anybody has any ideas of any foundations I can reach, please reach out to me and let me know. Thank you so much.